Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, July 28th, 2023. House and Senate begin the August recess, leaving Washington with many unanswered questions about how disagreements over government funding and defense policy between Republicans and Democrats, and in some cases between Republicans and other Republicans, will be worked out when they come back in September. We'll talk about the state of the congressional agenda with Nicholas Wu, congressional reporter with Politico. President Biden travels to the state of Maine for the first time in his presidency, talking about his economic agenda and a new executive order that encourages companies to manufacture new inventions in the United States. The DEA Administrator Anne Milgram is questioned by Congress about when marijuana may be removed from the federal Schedule I category that has most dangerous drugs. New U.S. military procedures for handling cases of sexual assault, domestic violence, murder, and other serious crimes in the ranks that removes them from the chain of command. Plus the latest on the coup in the African country of Niger. And in the U.S. House of Representatives, a fond farewell to a veteran employee retiring. She is the keeper of the mace, the elaborate staff that is the symbol of authority in that body. And leaders of both parties say she was not shy about enforcing House floor procedure. And we begin with the House and Senate not in session today, starting a 6-week recess. Coming up, we'll talk with Politico's congressional reporter Nicholas Wu about the legislative agenda when they come back in September. First, an exchange on the House floor on Thursday as members of Congress preparing to leave Washington, D.C. between the Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, and the Minority Whip Katherine Clark, Democrat of Massachusetts.
Just during this month, this House has completed the National Defense Authorization Act, the FAA Reauthorization Act, the Schools Note Shelter Act, and we just passed, of course, the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Act to make sure that our veterans, to make sure that we fully fund health care for our veterans, we support suicide prevention, and we also fund housing and other services for our men and women in uniform who keep us safe. With that, I would be happy to yield to the Democrat whip, Ms. Clark.
Thank you. I appreciate the leader for yielding. I think we have very different definitions of success for the American people. As Democrats, we have been focused and have been successful in growing our economy by growing the middle class, lowering healthcare costs, making sure that we are addressing climate change, having safer communities. And now, the Republican conference is saying they are sending us home for 6 weeks without funding the government, that we have one bill out of 12 completed because extremists are holding your conference hostage. And that's not the full story. The extremists are holding the American people hostage. We will have 12 days when we return to fund the government, to live up to the job the American people sent us here to do. This is a reckless march to a MAGA shutdown. And for what? In pursuit of a national abortion ban? Is that what we are doing here? The American people see through this. They know who is fighting for them, fighting for solutions. Your time is coming. The American people are watching. They are going to demand accountability. We should be staying here, completing these appropriation bills, stripping out the toxic, divisive, bigoted riders that have been put on these bills, and get back to work for freedom and for our economy and the American family. I yield back.
House to be in order. Gentleman from Louisiana is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would agree with the gentlelady on one thing. that she just said. The American people are watching. And what the American people just watched is every single Democrat vote against funding veterans benefits. Every single one. But thank goodness this Republican majority stood together and put the votes on the board, $138 billion, so our veterans will get the benefits that they deserve and earn. And if the Democrats are going to be extreme and walk away from that responsibility, we will be here standing to make the call, to make the tough votes, to get that work done, as the Appropriations Committee has done over and over again on bills that in committee Democrats have walked away from over and over again. So it's a little rich to complain about going home. We could stay here and watch you vote against every single other appropriations bill. We're going to continue negotiations during the August recess to make sure we get back to funding the priorities of the nation. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, when I talk about funding the priorities of the nation, let's talk about our nation's defense as we just funded our nation's veterans. Let's get back to funding things that actually help our military focus on the threats from China, not teaching hatred of America from within. Yes, we defunded that. So, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to do our job through the next weeks and months. We invite all to come to work like we have come to work to try to come to an agreement, not just to vote no, but to come to an agreement to solve these problems, to pass these bills. If both sides won't, we still will do that work. And I would yield one more time to the gentlelady.
Be in order.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The House will be in order.
The Majority Leader, Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, and the Minority Whip, Catherine Clark, Democrat of Massachusetts. Politico's congressional reporter Nicholas Wu joins us now with more on the early start to the congressional August recess and what's on the agenda when lawmakers return. Thanks for being with us. So I guess top of the list is the federal spending bills. Where are things?
Well, the spending bills are gearing up to be the big fight when lawmakers come back in September. They've broken out for 6 weeks. And as it's looking right now, Democratic lawmakers I've talked to are increasingly worried about what happens to all of this and the risks of a government shutdown. Since remember that the funding deadline is September 30th, and in a normal world, the House and Senate would have passed all of their appropriations bills and ironed out their differences and gotten something together. But that is not what's happened, and the House and Senate are very far apart.
Also, the House Representatives starting the recess early because they were going to bring up a funding bill for the Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration, but they scrapped it at the last moment. Exactly.
Votes on that were originally planned for today, but that was all scrapped yesterday afternoon when it looked like Republicans in the House still had a lot of differences to work out among themselves about everything from cuts in the bill to provisions relating to abortion pills that led to big differences between some more moderate Republicans from Biden-won congressional districts and those in the Freedom Caucus. And so, and meanwhile, the Senate is pushing through all of its appropriations bills. And so, with only maybe about a dozen days or so in September that both chambers are in session, prospects aren't looking great for everyone to come together.
And one more question on this. Have you heard that they're going to try to work through some of the differences during the August break?
That is something that lawmakers have talked about. Obviously, staff are all still here, and they can still keep working through a lot of these differences. But, of course, the August recess is traditionally a time when members head back to their districts and do things besides legislate, right? They're back talking to their constituents. And so maybe some of these differences could work themselves out over the next few weeks, and I'm sure lawmakers will hold virtual meetings and the like. But at the same time, it's obviously not the same as them being there, being on the floor of the House and being whipped and working it out amongst each other.
What other pieces of major legislation are you looking at, or are they looking at when they come back?
Well, one other thing that's on my mind is the NDAA, the Defense Authorization Bill. This is something else where the House and Senate could be quite a ways apart on. And normally this is a bipartisan bill. Both sides work it out. But all signs are pointing towards a conference committee to get this done. And, given the number of provisions that were added to the House bill that the conservatives have wanted, right, this could be a bitter pill to swallow for many in the Senate. So it kind of remains to be seen how exactly they're going to work out these differences on these massive pieces of legislation.
We're talking with Nicholas Wu from Politico. Senator Chuck Schumer, Majority Leader, held a news conference talking about some of the other things he'd like to see. One of them, rail safety.
Yes, rail safety is also something that's on the mind of quite a few lawmakers, especially those from Ohio in the aftermath of the rail disaster there. But this is something where the politics of a Senate election kind of collide with how exactly legislating works, right? As one of my colleagues reported recently, Senator Sherrod Brown is one of the folks spearheading a lot of this rail safety legislation, but at the same time, he's someone who Republicans might not necessarily want to give such a big legislative win, since they're, of course, trying to flip Senator Brown's seat next year. And so this is where the rubber kind of hits the road with legislating. And the same thing goes as with many things in Congress, right? You have differences between the House bills and the Senate bills on rail safety. So this is something else that's going to add to an already packed fall legislative calendar.
Staying with the Senate, the issue of stalled military nominations and related to the Pentagon's policy dealing with abortion, that seems to be still stalled months after Senator Tuberville put the hold on it.
It is stalled. This is something that a lot of lawmakers had hoped could be worked out before the August recess, and some influential Democrats, members of the Black Caucus, had even pushed for some kind of Senate rules change to circumvent this blockade, but that never really came together. And Senator Tuberville, despite some criticism from others in his party about the stance he's taken blocking so many nominees, kept it up. And so kind of remains to be seen, too, how exactly they're going to get all of these through, assuming that he ever lifts this blockade, just simply because there's so many nominees at this point that it'll just take a lot of time for the Senate to confirm all these folks.
Finally, going back to the federal government spending bills, and you mentioned there's only a dozen legislative days before the deadline hits October 1st. What are you hearing about how late this calendar year Congress may be in working? Are we heading towards Christmas again?
Well, as most things in Congress and around these sorts of big funding fights go, we're always told to keep our calendars in December flexible because, yes, we have this government funding deadline at the end of September, but there's a very real chance that they could punt everything towards the end of the calendar year, which, of course, falls around the Christmas and New Year's holidays. And, members of Congress like to expand and contract work to fit the amount of time they have, and so we can very much expect them to be working right up until the deadline with government funding and many, many other items that they have on the calendar.
Nicholas Wu covers Congress for Politico. Find his stories at Politico.com and on Twitter at NicholasWu12. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
As mentioned, the Senate passed the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, for fiscal year 2024 late Thursday night. The vote was 86-11. The 11 no votes were 7 members of the Democratic caucus and 4 Republicans. The Democrats and 1 independent, Cory Booker, Ed Markey, Jeff Merkley, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Peter Welch, and Ron Wyden. And the Republicans, Mike Braun, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, and J.D. Vance. After the NDAA passed, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer held a news conference talking about the agenda after the August recess.
We have lots of other things we want to do when we get back. Rail safety, a very high priority. Senator Brown is relentlessly leading the charge. I spoke to his colleague in the Senate tonight, and they're working together to build up enough support. We're working very hard and making great progress on $35 insulin for everybody. That will be a high priority when we get back. The FAA bill, the Senate bill that Senator Cantwell is working on, is very close to the House bill that has passed, so I expect we'll get an FAA bill very soon. And we're making good progress on safe banking, which is, as you know, has always been a priority for me. So there's a lot to do when we get back, but we're making good progress on every one of those pieces of legislation, as well as on the most important thing when we get back, funding the government in the appropriations process. The bill passed 86-11, and we're continuing. No one thought we would do it, but the tradition of doing it on time, doing it in a timely way, with virtually, if you watch the floor, almost no animus or acrimony, which says something. That's the leader I try to be. Number one goal, get things done for the American people. Cut costs, grow the middle class. These bills do that. Second, try to work in a bipartisan way as possible to get things done. And this Senate is an example of how bipartisanship can work. And again, let me just reiterate, because it's the contrast, the glaring contrast with the House, where the Republicans don't work in a bipartisan way and just throw stuff on the floor that they know has no chance of passing, doesn't help the American people one bit. And so I'm looking forward to this House looking to the Senate as to how to get America moving. With that, I'll answer your questions. Yes?
I understand you have a lot you want to get done when you come back in September. You touted the appropriations bills that the Senate was able to report today. The House is a different story, and there's obviously limited floor time in both the House and Senate. How concerned should Americans be at the prospect of a government shutdown? Well,
I hope there won't be a government shutdown. And, you know, there are some on the hard right in the House who want to shut down. But again, given what the Senate has done with 12 appropriations bills passed in a bipartisan way, I'm very hopeful that the House will accede to the Senate. Sort of like in the debt ceiling. Basically, the House, where while there was a lot of talk of letting us default, came over and basically came much closer to what we in the Senate wanted.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, Thursday night. Senate returns Tuesday, September 5th. The House is back a week later, September 12th. As always, watch and listen to the House and Senate live, gavel to gavel, on the C-SPAN TV networks and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Story from Associated Press. President Joe Biden has signed an executive order while visiting Maine on Friday to encourage companies to manufacture new inventions in the United States. President Biden landed in Maine for the first time since taking office, packaging his signing of the executive order with a speech at a textile factory in Auburn and a fundraiser in Freeport. The executive order, titled Invent It Here, Make It Here, is meant to benefit American workers, communities, and global supply chain resilience, according to the White House. That reporting from the Associated Press. Here's President Biden giving that speech in Auburn.
And today I'm going to sign an executive order called Invent It Here and Make It Here. It's here. It's just how it works. Federal agencies research and fund development to encourage innovation. This executive order dictates that those agencies have to prioritize domestic manufacturing when it comes time to bring those inventions to market. They can't go abroad. They have to look here. Who can do it here? That's the law, and we're just beginning to enforce it. Folks, we're not just making things in America. We're also buying America. I announced new standards to require construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. Lumber, glass, drywall, fiber optic cables, and more. Every federal infrastructure project will be built by American workers, using American products, creating American jobs.
President Biden in Auburn, Maine. The AP story on his visit includes this. President Biden won 3 out of the state's 4 electoral votes in 2020 and is seeking to shore up his support in the state. Maine allocates its electoral votes by congressional district, and President Biden lost the vote in the state's 2nd district, which provided the only electoral vote in New England for then-President Donald Trump, a Republican. That from AP. And Auburn, Maine, where he was today, is in that 2nd congressional district. Wall Street today, the Dow up 176, NASDAQ up 266, S&P up 44. Financial risks of climate change, the subject of a report at today's meeting of the Financial Stability Oversight Council at the Treasury Department. The FSOC, as it is known, was created a dozen years ago. It's chaired by the Treasury Secretary, and the members represent federal and state financial regulators. The report from the Climate-Related Financial Risk Committee of FSOC came from Federal Reserve Vice Chair for Supervision, Michael Barr.
Climate change poses significant challenges for the global economy and the financial system, with implications for the safety and soundness of financial institutions and the stability of the financial sector more broadly. It is important that we continue to work to ensure the financial system understands and appropriately manages the financial risks of climate change. While further work remains, I think this report shows we're moving in the right direction. The Federal Reserve's responsibilities with respect to climate change are important but narrow, and follow from our existing mandates to promote the safety and soundness of financial institutions and the stability of the financial sector more broadly. To note, the report highlights progress on scenario analysis. We at the Fed are conducting a pilot climate scenario analysis exercise to help both large banks and supervisors better understand the effects of various hypothetical climate scenarios on individual banks. The goal of the pilot exercise is to deepen understanding of risk management practices in this area and enhance the ability of the largest banks and supervisors to identify, measure, monitor, and manage climate-related financial risks. Because climate scenario analysis is an emerging risk management tool, the exercise is exploratory in nature, and there are no consequences for bank capital or supervisory implications. Around the end of this year, the board anticipates publishing information on an aggregated, not firm-specific basis to provide insights into how large banking organizations are incorporating climate-related financial risks into their risk management frameworks, and to highlight how participants are approaching and addressing practical and conceptual challenges with understanding climate-related financial risks.
Federal Reserve Vice Chair for Supervision Michael Barr at the Financial Stability Oversight Council meeting at the Treasury Department. Some participants, like him, taking part virtually. A story at the Detroit Free Press, federal transportation regulators announced a proposal Friday to boost fuel economy standards to an average of 58 miles per gallon for cars and light-duty trucks by 2032, a step likely to further advance the push toward electrification. Authorities said the proposal from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, part of the Department of Transportation, would align with proposed U.S. Environmental Protection Agency rule announced in the spring to limit emissions. The process would also include a 60-day public comment period, reporting from the Detroit Free Press. The head of the Drug Enforcement Administration, Anne Milgram, has committed to request a timeline for possible reclassification of marijuana from its current Schedule 1, which under federal law means it has no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Other Schedule 1 drugs are heroin, LSD, and ecstasy. Administrator Milgram testified before a House Judiciary Subcommittee on Thursday. Both Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida and Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee were pushing for reform. First, the questions from Congressman Gaetz.
Will you leave this briefing and encourage HHS to give you a timeline on getting that information to you?
I will ask.
Thank you. And when you receive the work product from HHS, is there any basis that DEA would have to oppose the descheduling of marijuana as a Schedule 1 drug?
So the way the scheduling process works under the law and the regulations is HHS does a review. They then send it to DEA. We then do what is known as an 8-factor review. There's an opportunity for public comment as well. And so we go through that part of the process. And so obviously we start with what HHS has provided us. We then go through our own review and a public comment process, and then we come to a scheduling decision.
And just share with me, with the country, what your perspective is on what the outcome of that should be?
Well, because I couldn't prejudge it at this point in time, I have not seen.
Do you have a personal view on whether or not marijuana should be a Schedule I drug?
As the head of the DEA, I will ultimately be responsible for signing off on what the scheduling is.
Will you consider in the analysis that's being done the studies that pretty extensively show that in states where there is medical marijuana access, there's a lower rate of prescribing these opioids that then can lead to addiction, which then can lead to the deaths that we've seen?
You have my full commitment, Congressman, that I will keep an open mind. I will look at all the research. I expect that we will get, additional public comment or research that comes in, and I will look at all of it.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a study conducted by two PhDs, Marie Hayes and Mark Brown, that looked at the prescribing of opioids in states with medical marijuana programs and indeed found that states with medical cannabis laws had a 24.8 lower mean annual opioid overdose mortality rate.
Without objection.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, with the DEA Administrator Anne Milgram at Thursday's subcommittee hearing. Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee also supported moving faster to change the federal scheduling of marijuana.
I've been here 17 years, and it's not your fault, but I've seen DEA heads, I've seen FBI directors, I've seen attorney generals sit exactly where you're saying and say governmental gibberish about marijuana. They've done nothing for 17 years and for years before that, and it goes back to the 30s. And the government has messed this up forever, and you need to get ahead of the railroad. You're going to get something from HHS. Biden understands it should be reclassified. He said from 1 to 3, it ought to be classified from 1 to 420. And we ought to just clean it up and get over with it. Fentanyl was Schedule 1 and Schedule 2s. It's been Schedule 2 drug for a while, and fentanyl substances have been in Schedule 1 since 2018. But since we changed it, we've had an increase, a 460% increase in fentanyl traffic offenders. For related substances, it's been up 208%. Obviously, changing the rating, the scheduling, and raising it doesn't stop the use. It's popular. There's money to be made. You caught El Chapo, you put him in prison, his sons took over the operation. There are rats that replace the big rats. That happens to the drug trade. You've got to have a better answer. You've got to do something different. This is going to go on until your great-grandchildren are sitting in this chair.
Congressman Steve Cohen, Democrat from Tennessee, at Thursday's House Judiciary Subcommittee hearing on DEA oversight. The witness, the Administrator Anne Milgram. 23 states and the District of Columbia have legalized recreational use of cannabis. Another 8 states have decriminalized its use. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Leaders of the coup in the African country of Niger have said that a general who was the head of the Presidential Guard is now the new president of a military council running the country. The statement from this National Council for Safeguarding the Homeland reads, the president of the CNSP is the head of state. He represents the state of Niger in international relations. The Constitution has been suspended and the government dissolved, and the CNSP will exercise all legislative and executive power. John Kirby is a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council. He addressed this in his opening statement of a news conference today.
We remain deeply concerned about the unfolding developments and the attempts led by the commander of the Presidential Guard to take power by force. We continue to call for the immediate and safe release of President Bazoum and his family. And we're closely monitoring the situation, and we will continue to do that around the clock. The United States condemns in the strongest terms any effort to seize power by force and to disrupt constitutional order in Niger. We stand firm in our support for respect democratic governance, the rule of law, public safety. And we remind those attempting this power grab by force that an overthrow of democratically elected President Bazoum would place U.S. substantial cooperation with the government of Niger at risk, which is predicated, that support is predicated on Niger's continued commitment to democratic norms and to the rule of law. Specifically, a military takeover may cause the United States to seize security and other cooperation with the government of Niger, jeopardizing existing security and non-security partnerships. Such a takeover would strengthen violent extremist organizations, undercut stability in the country, and exacerbate regional insecurity and violence. Further, a military takeover would undermine Niger's authority as a regional leader, and they are. The United States and Niger's partners in Africa, as well as other international partners, are closely watching this situation to determine our next steps collectively. We continue to express our support for the efforts of ECOWAS, the African Union, governments in the region, as well as the United Nations in support of President Bazoum. And we welcomed, of course, statements reaffirming those groups, their opposition to any seizure of power by unconstitutional means and efforts at mediating this crisis. To American citizens that are in Niger, we strongly urge you to follow the recommendations that we have made this week. In particular, we encourage you to enroll in the State Department's Smart Traveler Enrollment Program at step.state.gov to receive important emergency information and to be able to stay up to date on our travel advisories and alerts. To the people of Niger, it's important that you know the United States and this administration stands with you. We are committed to defending democratic governance and the respect for the rule of law and human rights. Now, I know one of the first questions I'm probably going to get asked after reading that is, geez, military leader stood up on camera today and declared that he had taken over. And I would just tell you, we believe that there is still space for diplomacy here, and that diplomacy is actively being pursued, not just by the United States, but by our allies and partners and our African partners as well. So that is why my statement was written the way it was. That is why I used the words I did, and we're continuing to pursue diplomacy here.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council, in an audio briefing with reporters. A Reuters article reads, before the uprising this week, Niger was seen as the West's most stable ally in a region beset by Islamist insurgents. A number of foreign troops are based there, including French and American forces. Niger is also the world's 7th biggest producer of uranium, the radioactive metal widely used for nuclear energy and in nuclear weapons, as well as treating cancer. Niger borders 3 countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad, that have also experienced military coups in the last 2 years. That was from Reuters. Back to John Kirby in his news conference. He also talked about a U.S. military reform today. President Biden signing an executive order to change how the military handles cases of sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, murder, and other serious crimes to, as the New York Times puts it, ensure prosecutions that are independent of the chain of command.
The president signed an executive order this morning that strengthens how our military handles reports of sexual assault and other serious offenses. The executive order amended the Uniform Code of Military Justice to transfer key decision-making authorities and prosecution of these crimes from commanders from the chain of command to specialized independent military prosecutors. It is a monumental step. Any change to the Uniform Code of Military Justice is a big deal. This one is particularly important, given the scourge of sexual assault and sexual harassment that the military still continues to wrestle with. But it's going to help us prevent the crimes. It's going to help us protect and support victims, but obviously it's going to really help us hold offenders appropriately accountable. And it's a turning point, quite frankly, for survivors of gender-based violence in the military, and represents truly the most significant transformation of the military justice system since the Uniform Code of Military Justice was established in 1950.
John Kirby, spokesperson for the White House National Security Council. The executive order implements changes passed by Congress as part of the National Defense Authorization Act from fiscal year 2022 and comes a few years after an independent review commission on sexual assault in the military made these recommendations. The Truman Library Institute has been holding programs this week on the 75th anniversary of President Harry S. Truman's executive order that desegregated the military and another one that desegregated the federal workforce. President Biden spoke about this Thursday night, and today one of the speakers was his nominee for the next chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the current Air Force Chief of Staff, General Charles C.Q. Brown.
We must reflect how far we've come as a nation. Major General James Hamlet, an infantry officer in the segregated 92nd Infantry Division in World War II, and an Army aviator in Vietnam, said at his retirement ceremony, "When I entered the Army, a black man was not allowed to lead a squad to the latrine. We have come a long way. We have come a long way indeed." Today, we celebrate progress only possible due to courageous leaders, seizing the opportunity that made possible so many extraordinary achievements, many of them first. As we look forward, we must remember that progress is a constant in our free society. I hope that one day, progress will mean that there will be no more firsts to be celebrated, that we all are all left celebrating each other's achievements as fellow Americans. That future becoming a reality is in large part thanks to the opportunities unlocked 75 years ago. They ensure the next great generation will be stronger than the last. Because today, Americans from all backgrounds are working together to move our nation forward. And when this event is held 25, 50, 75 years from now, celebrating the 150th anniversary, may we all reflect on the progress we've continued to make. May we repeat the words of General Hamlet, "We've come a long way," because Executive Order 9981 made it possible for ordinary Americans to have so many extraordinary opportunities.
General C.Q. Brown, Air Force Chief of Staff, nominated for chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at today's Truman Library Institute program, held at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington. A story at thehill.com, Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Friday said he plans to talk with Congressman Derek Van Orden, Republican of Wisconsin, about his expletive-laced confrontation with teenage Senate pages early Thursday morning. "I haven't been able to speak to him yet," McCarthy told reporters. "I'll call him today. I don't know the situation. I saw what was reported. That's not the norm of Derek Van Orden." Speaker McCarthy said the whole incident might be a misunderstanding. The Hill article continues. A transcript written by a page minutes after the incident, obtained by the Hill, recalled Congressman Orden calling the group of 16 and 17-year-old pages jackasses and pieces of S-word for lying in the Capitol Rotunda early Thursday morning. Rotunda is a common spot for pages to relax when Senate business goes late. Again, reporting by the Hill. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell talked about this incident on the Senate floor Thursday night.
Today is the final day for this page class. It's been a busy session. The pages can help make this place run smoothly. They're here when we need them, and they have served this institution with grace. However, I understand that late last night, a member of the House majority thought it appropriate to curse at some of these young people, these teenagers, in the rotunda. I was shocked when I heard about it, and I am further shocked at his refusal to apologize to these young people. I can't speak for the House of Representatives, but I do not think that one member's disrespect is shared by this body, by Leader McConnell and myself. So I would like to take a moment to thank these pages for their assistance these many weeks. We wish them well as they return to their homes and families. Now turn to Leader McConnell.
The Republican leader.
Mr. President, I want to associate myself with the remarks of the Majority Leader. Everybody on this side of the aisle feels exactly the same way.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell Thursday night. Congressman Derek Van Orden put out a statement. "The Capitol Rotunda served as a field hospital where countless Union soldiers died fighting to free men in the Civil War. I have long said our nation's capital is a symbol of the sacrifice our servicemen and women have made for this country and should never be treated like a frat house common room. Threatening a congressman with bad press to excuse poor behavior is a reminder of everything that's wrong with Washington. Luckily, bad press has never bothered me, and if it's the price I pay to stand up for what's right, then so be it. That statement from Congressman Van Orden. Both House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries praised this week a longtime employee of the U.S. House who is retiring. Joyce Hamlet is Assistant Sergeant at Arms and Keeper of the Mace. That's the ornate silver and ivory staff with an eagle on top, a symbol of the authority of the House. It's carried in front of the Speaker in a procession to the rostrum at the start of each day's session. Speaker McCarthy began the tribute on the House floor Tuesday.
After 35 years of working in Congress, she is about to begin a well-earned retirement where she will spend time with her loved ones. This is truly an end to an era. Joyce is the first African-American woman to be appointed as the Keeper of the Mace. Now, we can tell we all know Joyce, and she knows each and every one of us. She's gotten to know some of you even better than others. For those at home, Joyce is the keeper of the rules. And just so you know that she is fair to all, it was just last month. I thought being Speaker, I could have my own rules. And I brought somebody onto the floor. I asked the people outside, hey, can I bring somebody onto the floor? I thought we were out of session. They said, you're the Speaker, go ahead. So I walked in those doors, but somebody stopped me. It was Joyce. So if it's not just me sneaking on the floor, but you without a tie or a proper attire, you have received a polite reminder from Joyce about the rules of decorum. I would watch at times at the greatest height where we were not getting along with one another. When the tensions were high, I was afraid to talk to some of my own members. But when Joyce walked up with that unbelievable smile and she would tell them they were doing something wrong, it was just like she was the teacher and they were in the first grade. Yes, Miss Joyce, and sat right back down.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on the House floor on Tuesday. The Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries also thanking the Assistant Sergeant at Arms, Joyce Hamlet, for her service.
On behalf of House Democrats, it is a distinct privilege to publicly honor her incredible career of service to the United States House of Representatives. 35 years of poise, professionalism, and particularity. In the early 1990s, after spending some time in the prior decade as a cafeteria worker, elevator operator, and doorkeeper, Joyce secured a position in chamber security with the Sergeant at Arms, where she began to firmly enforce the rules of decorum on the House floor. Emphasis on the word firmly. Upon arriving in the Congress as a new member, I quickly came to the conclusion, don't mess with Joyce. As House Democratic leader, I came to the same conclusion, don't mess with Joyce.
House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries on the House floor on Tuesday on the retirement of Joyce Hamlet, Assistant Sergeant at Arms and Keeper of the Mace. The Sergeant at Arms office was created in 1789 by one of the first resolutions passed by the very first U.S. Congress. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.